Díagwich. Fáilte agus welcome. So we're going to have a look today at an old story from County Monaghan. So it's from Cavanree in County Monaghan. And it's about one night a man was going by a rowan tree at Currickfinna, which is Silver Stream in County Monaghan, when he heard something growling. He went over to the rowan tree and a voice said, "Grr, grr." It's literally what it says, transcription. He went closer, and now there was a stream on the other side of the rowan tree, but he wasn't aware of it. So the fairy, which is what was growling, crossed to the other side of the stream, and the man ran after it. He fell into the deep stream, and he could hear something saying, "Take that, take that." He saved himself from getting drowned, and he thought the voice must belong to a fairy, but he said nothing. Then the fairy said, "Speak," and the man said, "Why?" and caught hold of it. The fairy then at that point gets scared by being held in the grip of a mortal man and says, "Don't drown me." And when the fairy spoke to him, and the shock of the whole thing was so intense that the man actually dropped the fairy into the stream and ended up drowning the fairy. So the fairy apparently died in the stream, and it was the man's fault. And the story goes that the man didn't even make it home that night, that there was bad luck in the fairy, and he'd crossed a line, obviously, drowning the feckin' thing. So he didn't even make it home that night. So that is an interesting little story, because we often kind of hear, we see and we hear in modern paganism, we hear about the idea of the fairies being our friends, and that we can kind of work with them, and you can technically work with them. There are people who can and who form relationships with them, but for your average person coming across a fairy or the good neighbors in the Irish tradition, they weren't working with them. They weren't their friends. They were little mini enemies, and sometimes very big enemies, depending on the particular type of she, because there wasn't just one tiny little fairy type. So it's a really good illustration from the Irish folklore, and this is direct from Dukas, which is the National Schools collection. I'll put a link to the original story down below. It's a really good example of how the Irish do not fuck with the fairies. So it's really important that if you're working with Irish paganism, that you understand that this is the kind of attitude that you really kind of need to bring to it, that even if you do something by accident, like accidentally drown a fairy, it wasn't your intent, but you overstep their bounds or you disrespect them, that they will mess you up. Now, obviously, there's a death for a death in this particular story, but the lesser kind of disrespecting would apply as well. So, even if you do something accidentally, then it's important that you understand enough of how to make reparations, or you understand enough not to do something accidentally in the first place. So I do recommend Morgan Daimler's work on the fairies in Irish tradition and Scottish tradition and Celtic cultures generally. I believe they work with. So I'll put links to that down below. And I do actually run a class on the other crowd, as we call them here, and how, not to get fucked by the fairies. So I'll put a link to that. It's on the Irish Pagan Schools, so you can have a look at that. But do go and have a look at the original story as well in the links below, and make sure that you're educated enough, and have a fish around in Dukas as well, because there's some really interesting stuff in there about how the Irish actually interacted with the other crowd, with the good neighbours. Okay. So I hope you're having a good holiday season. This is recorded in December the 27th. So I hope you're having a good holiday season, and you enjoy the rest of the holidays if you celebrate. And if you don't, just have a good week. Slán go fóill.